Few names resonate through history with the same chilling weight as Joseph Stalin. Born in a small Georgian town, he ascended to the pinnacle of power in the Soviet Union, ruling with an iron fist for nearly 3 decades. Stalin's story is one of ambition, ruthlessness, and ultimately tragedy on an unprecedented scale. His decisions reshaped the geopolitical landscape, sparked global conflicts, and left a permanent mark on the 20th century. This documentary delves into the life and times of Joseph Stalin, from his humble beginnings to his death as the undisputed dictator of a superpower. We will explore his tumultuous childhood, his early involvement in revolutionary politics, and his cunning rise through the ranks of the Bolshevik Party. From there, we will examine his brutal consolidation of power, his controversial economic policies, and his pivotal role in the Second World War. Beyond the political arena, we will also touch upon the man behind the Iron Curtain. We will uncover aspects of his personal life, his relationships, and the personality traits that shaped his leadership. Finally, we will examine his twilight years, marked by paranoia, declining health, and a legacy that continues to be debated to this day. Joseph Stalin's life was one of stark contrasts. He was born into poverty in the small town of Gori, Georgia, a world away from the halls of power he would one day occupy. His journey from obscurity to the helm of a vast empire is a tale as improbable as it was consequential. Understanding Stalin's rise to power requires a closer look at the turbulent times in which he lived. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were a period of immense upheaval in Russia. The Romanov dynasty, which had ruled for centuries, was crumbling under the weight of its own inefficiency and the growing discontent of the populace. Social unrest was rampant, fueled by economic inequality, political oppression, and the desire for change. It was in this cauldron of revolution and uncertainty that Joseph Stalin, a young man shaped by hardship and driven by a thirst for power, found his calling. The Bolshevik Party, led by the charismatic Vladimir Lenin, offered a radical vision for Russia's future, one that resonated deeply with Stalin's own revolutionary fervor. Stalin's early life and the political climate of his time served as the crucible in which his ideology and ambitions were forged. To understand the man who would become the man of steel, we must first delve into the formative experiences that shaped his worldview. Stalin's life was riddled with contradictions. He was a man of great intellect and charisma, yet capable of unspeakable cruelty. He was a revolutionary who fought for the downtrodden, yet established a regime marked by repression and terror. These contradictions are essential to understanding the complexity of Stalin as both an individual and a historical figure. Born Iosif Vissarionis Dzhugashvili, he later adopted the name Stalin, meaning man of steel in Russian, a moniker that would become synonymous with his unyielding rule. His early life was marked by poverty and hardship, experiences that undoubtedly shaped his worldview. Despite his humble beginnings, Stalin was a bright student, excelling in his studies and demonstrating a keen intellect. He was drawn to the writings of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, which offered a scathing critique of capitalism and a vision for a classless society. These ideas resonated deeply with Stalin, fueling his revolutionary spirit and setting the stage for his entry into the world of radical politics. However, Stalin's embrace of Marxist ideology was accompanied by a ruthlessness and pragmatism that would come to define his political career. He was not afraid to employ violence and intimidation to achieve his goals, and his rise to power was marked by both cunning strategy and brutal purges. The seeds of the dictator he would become were sown in these early years, a potent mix of revolutionary zeal and an unyielding thirst for power. Joseph Stalin's early life was a harsh lesson in the realities of poverty and societal inequity. Born in 1878 in Gori, a small town nestled within the Russian Empire's Georgian province, his childhood was a far cry from the halls of power he would one day inhabit. His parents, Vissarion Dzhugashvili and Ketevan Galadze, struggled to make ends meet. Vissarion, a cobbler by trade, was known for his heavy drinking and volatile temper, often taking out his frustrations on young Joseph, as Stalin was called then. The family lived in a succession of cramped and dilapidated homes, their poverty a stark contrast to the opulence enjoyed by the Russian aristocracy. Disease was a constant threat, and tragedy struck early when two of Stalin's siblings succumbed to illness in infancy. These early losses cast a long shadow over the family and likely contributed to the stoicism that would later characterize Stalin's personality. Adding to the family's woes, Joseph suffered a physical disability in his youth. A carriage accident left him with a slightly deformed left arm, a source of both physical discomfort and social stigma. This experience further alienated him from his peers and fueled a deep-seated resentment towards those he perceived as privileged and fortunate. The brutal realities of life in Guri, coupled with a turbulent home life and physical challenges, left a lifetime impression on young Joseph. It fostered in him a sense of injustice, a simmering anger towards the existing social order, and a fierce determination to overcome his circumstances, traits that would ultimately shape his path to power. Despite the hardships of his early life, Stalin found solace and inspiration in unexpected places, books and rebellion. While his formal education was limited, his sharp mind craved knowledge, and he devoured books whenever he could get his hands on them. He excelled in his studies at the local church school, impressing his teachers with his intelligence and thirst for learning. His early readings exposed him to a world beyond the poverty and limitations of Guri. He delved into Georgian literature, absorbing tales of heroism, resistance, and national pride, themes that resonated deeply with his own experiences under Russian rule. The stories fueled his sense of Georgian identity and planted the seeds of rebellion against perceived oppression. Beyond literature, Stalin also sought refuge in the camaraderie and defiance of underground groups. Guri, like many corners of the Russian Empire, was a hotbed of revolutionary sentiment. Secret societies and study circles sprung up, challenging the Tsarist regime and its oppressive policies. These groups, often comprised of students, intellectuals and workers, exposed Stalin to socialist ideas and revolutionary tactics. He participated in clandestine meetings, distributed illegal pamphlets, and engaged in acts of petty sabotage against local authorities. These experiences provided an outlet for his growing frustration with the status quo and honed his skills in organization and agitation. In 1894, at the age of 15, Stalin received a scholarship to attend the Tiflis Theological Seminary, a prestigious institution in the Georgian capital. His mother, a devoutly religious woman, saw this as a path to a respectable life for her son, a life far removed from the poverty and turmoil of Guri. However, the seminary would prove to be a turning point for Stalin, leading him further down the path of revolution. While the seminary aimed to mold its students into loyal servants of the Russian Orthodox Church, it inadvertently exposed Stalin to a wider range of intellectual currents that challenged his religious beliefs and solidified his revolutionary convictions. He delved into forbidden texts, engaging with the works of Enlightenment thinkers, Russian radicals and socialist philosophers like Karl Marx. The seminary's oppressive atmosphere further fueled Stalin's rebellious spirit. The rigid discipline, strict censorship, and constant surveillance by the seminary authorities only served to strengthen his opposition to authority in any form. He found common cause with fellow students who chafed under the seminary's restrictions, forming secret study groups to discuss forbidden literature and debate revolutionary ideas. As Stalin's involvement in these clandestine activities grew, his academic performance suffered. He neglected his theological studies, openly questioned religious dogma, and challenged his teachers' authority. His open defiance alienated him from the seminary authorities, leading to repeated reprimands and punishments. The more Stalin immersed himself in revolutionary literature and engaged in clandestine activities, the more disillusioned he became with religion and the Tsarist regime. He came to view the Orthodox Church as an instrument of oppression, complicit in maintaining the status quo that kept the masses impoverished and powerless. Karl Marx's writings, with their emphasis on class struggle and the inevitability of revolution, resonated deeply with his own experiences and growing sense of social justice. By his early 20s, Stalin had fully embraced Marxism, abandoning any pretense of religious devotion. He saw in Marxist ideology a blueprint for societal transformation, a way to overthrow the existing power structures and create a more just and equitable society. His commitment to the cause was unwavering, and he dedicated himself to the revolutionary struggle with a fervor that would characterize his entire life. His activities outside the seminary intensified. He became increasingly involved in the burgeoning socialist movement in Tiflis, joining the ranks of the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party, the forerunner to the Communist Party. Within the RSDLP, Stalin gravitated towards the Bolshevik faction, led by the exiled revolutionary Vladimir Lenin. Lenin's radical ideology, his unwavering commitment to overthrowing the Tsarist regime, and his vision for a socialist Russia resonated deeply with Stalin. He embraced the Bolsheviks' emphasis on disciplined organization, clandestine action, and, if necessary, violence to achieve their revolutionary goals. It was within the ranks of the Bolsheviks that Stalin honed his skills as an organizer, propagandist, and agitator, qualities that would prove instrumental in his rise to power. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were a time of great upheaval in Russia. The Russo-Japanese War of 1905, a humiliating defeat for the Tsarist regime, exposed the government's weakness and sparked widespread unrest. Workers went on strike, peasants revolted, and calls for political reform intensified. The Tsar, forced to concede, issued the October Manifesto promising civil liberties and a democratically elected parliament, the Duma. These events had a profound impact on Stalin. He witnessed firsthand the power of organized resistance and the potential for revolution. He participated in demonstrations, organized strikes, and engaged in acts of sabotage against government institutions. His activities attracted the attention of the Tsarist secret police, the Okhrana, forcing him into hiding and setting him on a path of clandestine activism that would characterize much of his early career. To evade arrest, Stalin adopted a number of aliases, moving from city to city, organizing workers, spreading propaganda, and raising funds for the Bolshevik cause. He became increasingly involved in the criminal underworld, participating in bank robberies and extortion schemes to finance the revolution. These experiences hardened him, exposing him to the brutal realities of underground life and instilling in him a ruthless pragmatism that would later define his rule. By 1917, after years of clandestine activism, exile, and imprisonment, Stalin had emerged as a key figure in the Bolshevik Party. The early 20th century was a time of great turmoil in Russia. The Romanov dynasty was collapsing, weakened by economic inequality, social unrest, and World War I. Amidst this, Joseph Stalin, a committed Bolshevik, operated in the shadows, evading the Okhrana. Living clandestinely, Stalin adopted aliases and moved frequently. He traveled across the Russian Empire, spreading Bolshevik propaganda and organizing workers. Life on the run honed Stalin's skills in subterfuge and leadership. To sustain the movement, Stalin engaged in criminal activities. He participated in bank robberies and extortion schemes. These actions showed his commitment to the revolution. Stalin's underground experiences shaped his worldview. They instilled in him a distrust of authority and a belief in secrecy and violence. Stalin was forged in the crucible of revolution, his character hardened by struggle and danger. As World War I raged on, its devastating consequences reverberated throughout Russia. The Tsarist government, already struggling to maintain control, faced mounting criticism for its handling of the war effort. Military defeats, economic hardship, and widespread food shortages fueled popular discontent, pushing the country closer to the brink of revolution. The Bolsheviks, led by the exiled Vladimir Lenin, skillfully exploited this growing unrest. From his exile in Switzerland, Lenin issued his famous April Theses, calling for the overthrow of the provisional government and the establishment of a socialist state. Stalin, having returned from exile in Siberia, played a key role in disseminating Lenin's ideas and mobilizing support for the Bolsheviks in the lead-up to the October Revolution. The February Revolution of 1917 toppled the Tsarist regime, but it did not bring an end to the turmoil in Russia. The provisional government, composed of liberals and moderate socialists, proved unable to address the country's pressing problems. The Bolsheviks, with their radical message of peace, land and bread, gained increasing support among the war-weary populace, particularly in the urban centers of Petrograd and Moscow. Under Lenin's leadership, the Bolsheviks planned their seizure of power. They established a military arm, the Red Guards, composed of factory workers and soldiers, and began to take control of key infrastructure in Petrograd, including communication lines, transportation hubs, and government buildings. In the tumultuous months leading up to the October Revolution, Stalin emerged as a prominent figure within the Bolshevik Party. While Lenin remained in exile, directing the revolution from afar, Stalin served as a vital link between the party leadership and the growing ranks of Bolshevik activists on the ground. Recognizing Stalin's organizational skills and his ability to navigate the complexities of underground work, Lenin appointed him to the editorial board of Pravda, the Bolsheviks' main newspaper. Stalin used this platform to disseminate party propaganda, articulate Bolshevik ideology, and rally support for the revolution among the working class. Beyond his work with Pravda, Stalin played a crucial role in organizing the Red Guards, the Bolsheviks' paramilitary force. He helped to train and equip these workers' militias, preparing them for the armed insurrection that would topple the provisional government. His experience in the criminal underworld, particularly his knowledge of weapons and tactics, proved invaluable in these efforts. As the October Revolution approached, Stalin's responsibilities within the party grew. He served on the Military Revolutionary Committee, the body responsible for planning and executing the Bolshevik seizure of power. While Leon Trotsky, another prominent Bolshevik leader, is often credited with masterminding the military aspects of the revolution, Stalin's contributions to the logistical and organizational aspects should not be underestimated. Following the Bolshevik seizure of power in October 1917, Russia descended into a bloody civil war. Stalin's ruthlessness and organizational skills propelled him up the ranks, leading Lenin to appoint him People's Commissar for Nationalities. By the early 1920s, the Bolsheviks had emerged victorious from the Russian Civil War, but the country lay in ruins. During this period, the power struggle to succeed the ailing Lenin began, ultimately seeing Stalin emerge as the undisputed dictator. Following Lenin's death in 1924, a power vacuum emerged. Stalin, often overlooked, outmaneuvered his rivals with political cunning and pragmatism. He used his position as General Secretary to appoint allies, ensuring loyalty and marginalizing opponents. Throughout the 1920s, Stalin systematically consolidated his power, eliminating rivals and establishing a totalitarian dictatorship. Initially presenting himself as a proponent of collective leadership, he used this as a tactical maneuver to mask his ambition. Trotsky, his main rival, was forced into exile and later assassinated on Stalin's orders. With his grip on power secure, Stalin launched the first of a series of five-year plans in 1928 to rapidly industrialize the Soviet Union. Forced collectivization in the countryside led to widespread famine, particularly in Ukraine, known as the Holodomor. Despite the human cost, Stalin remained committed to his vision of rapid industrialization. The mid-1930s witnessed the Great Terror, a period of unprecedented repression and mass killings. Fueled by paranoia, Stalin unleashed a wave of terror, targeting political opponents and ordinary citizens. The NKVD, under ruthless leadership, became an instrument of terror, arresting, torturing, and executing thousands. The outbreak of World War II in 1939 presented Stalin with unprecedented challenges. Initially neutral, the Soviet Union was caught off guard by Hitler's surprise attack in 1941. Despite initial setbacks, the Soviet Union played a pivotal role in the Allied victory, enduring unimaginable sacrifices. In the aftermath of World War II, Stalin presided over a period of reconstruction and consolidation. He tightened his grip on power, suppressing dissent and reinforcing his cult of personality. Internationally, Stalin sought to expand Soviet influence, fueling tensions with the United States and leading to the Cold War. Stalin's personal life remains an enigma, marked by secrecy and propaganda. His private life was filled with personal tragedies and strained relationships. Understanding Stalin's personal life is essential to comprehending the man who wielded immense power. One significant event in Stalin's personal life was the tragic death of his second wife, Nadezhda Alliluyeva. Their relationship ended in Nadezhda's suicide in 1932, leaving Stalin devastated. Her death fueled rumors and speculation that continue to swirl around her to this day. Stalin's personal life was marked by complex and strained relationships with his children. He was a distant and demanding father, instilling a mixture of fear and admiration. His daughter, Svetlana, defected to the United States in 1967, publicly denouncing her father's regime. On a personal level, Stalin left behind a legacy as complex and contradictory as his public persona. To his supporters, he was a devoted family man, a man of simple tastes and habits who dedicated his life to the service of his country and the cause of communism. To his detractors, he was a cold-hearted tyrant, a man who sacrificed his family and countless others on the altar of his ambition and his paranoid pursuit of absolute power. The truth, as is often the case with historical figures of Stalin's stature, likely lies somewhere in between these two extremes. While there is evidence to suggest that he was capable of genuine affection, particularly towards his children when they were young, his personal life was ultimately overshadowed by his ruthless pursuit of power and his deep-seated paranoia. The secrecy that surrounded Stalin's private life, coupled with the fear that permeated Soviet society, has made it difficult to separate fact from fiction, to discern the man from the myth. However, by piecing together the fragments of evidence that do exist, we can gain a glimpse into the personal life of one of the 20th century's most influential and enigmatic figures, a life marked by both tragedy and triumph, love and loss, tenderness and terror. Understanding Stalin's personal life, however flawed and incomplete our knowledge may be, is essential to comprehending the man who wielded such immense power and whose decisions shaped the course of history for millions. As Joseph Stalin entered his twilight years, the Soviet Union he had ruled began to mirror the man himself, aging, inflexible, and increasingly isolated. Declining health fueled his deepening paranoia, with devastating consequences for those around him. Years of stress and heavy smoking took their toll. By the late 1940s, he suffered from numerous ailments. These health problems affected his judgment and exacerbated his suspicious nature. He saw enemies everywhere, convinced of plots within the party and army. Stalin's later years were marked by a tragic paradox. He achieved immense power but lived in constant fear, imprisoned by his own paranoia. A chilling example of Stalin's escalating paranoia in his later years was the infamous Doctor's Plot, a fabricated conspiracy theory that gripped the Soviet Union in the early 1950s. This manufactured crisis, orchestrated by Stalin himself, targeted prominent Jewish doctors, accusing them of plotting to assassinate Soviet leaders and highlighting the insidious anti-Semitism that had taken root within the regime. The seeds of the doctor's plot were sown in Stalin's own mind, a toxic brew of suspicion, resentment, and a long-held distrust of intellectuals, particularly those of Jewish descent. He had always viewed doctors with a mixture of fear and disdain, seeing them as potential threats to his control and resentful of their specialized knowledge, which he could neither fully grasp nor dominate. The plot itself began with a seemingly innocuous incident: the death of Andrei Zhdanov, a close confidant of Stalin and a leading figure in the Soviet cultural sphere. When Zhdanov died of a heart attack in 1948, Stalin, convinced that his death was no accident, ordered an investigation. He pressured his security apparatus to uncover evidence of foul play, focusing their attention on a group of prominent doctors, many of whom were Jewish. Under duress and threats of torture, the accused doctors confessed to a wide range of outlandish crimes, including poisoning Zhdanov and plotting to assassinate other Soviet leaders. These confessions, coerced and demonstrably false, were nonetheless publicized throughout the Soviet Union, fueling a wave of anti-Semitic hysteria and paranoia. A legacy marred by fear, the last days of Stalin. As the doctor's plot unfolded, casting a pall of fear and suspicion over the Soviet Union, Stalin's own health continued to decline. He withdrew further into himself, isolating himself in his Kremlin apartment or at his dacha outside Moscow, his interactions with even his closest advisors becoming increasingly infrequent and unpredictable. The once vibrant dictator, who had relished power struggles and micromanaging every aspect of Soviet life, now seemed content to rule from the shadows, his grip on reality loosening as his physical and mental faculties deteriorated. He communicated primarily through written notes, his handwriting shaky, and his pronouncements often cryptic and paranoid, leaving his subordinates to decipher his true intentions and govern a superpower in a state of perpetual uncertainty. Those who dared to approach Stalin in his final years found a man transformed. His once sharp mind seemed clouded, his pronouncements rambling and disjointed. He was prone to fits of anger and paranoia, lashing out at those around him, even accusing his longtime allies of treason and conspiracy. The fear that had always been a hallmark of Stalin's rule reached its zenith in his final days. His inner circle, once eager to please and anticipate his every whim, now lived in a state of perpetual terror, fearful of becoming the next target of his unpredictable wrath. The man who had built his power on fear had become a prisoner of his own creation, his legacy irrevocably tarnished by the very system of repression he had unleashed. Death of a tyrant, uncertainty and a power vacuum. On March 1st, 1953, Joseph Stalin suffered a massive stroke at his dacha outside Moscow. His illness sent shockwaves through the Kremlin, triggering a scramble for power among his lieutenants. Stalin lingered on the brink of death, his inner circle locked in a tense vigil. Finally, on March 5th, 1953, Stalin breathed his last, marking the end of an era. The news of Stalin's death was met with grief, shock, and relief. Millions had lived their entire lives under his shadow. Now, with the dictator gone, uncertainty gripped the nation. What would the future hold for the Soviet Union? A collective leadership emerged, vying for power, but wary of past mistakes. The struggle to fill the void led to the rise of Nikita Khrushchev and de-Stalinization. Section 1. A legacy forged in steel and blood. Joseph Stalin's death in 1953 marked the end of an era for the Soviet Union and the world. His reign did more than just shape the geopolitical landscape, but also altered the fate of millions. Stalin's legacy is complex, forged in revolution, industrialization, and war. He transformed a nation in turmoil into a global superpower. Rapid industrialization laid the foundation for a scientific and military powerhouse. Yet these achievements came at a staggering human cost. Stalin's ruthless pursuit of power led to millions of deaths. Forced collectivization, purges, and the Gulag stand as chilling testaments to his brutality. Stalin's reign twisted noble goals into a ruthless dictatorship. His legacy is a cautionary tale about the dangers of absolute power and utopian ideologies. The enduring shadow of Stalin. Stalin's shadow looms over Russia and the world, even decades after his death. His legacy divides opinion, marked by both achievements and atrocities. Some see him as a strong leader, others remember his brutal dictatorship. Stalin's impact on history remains a subject of intense debate. If you enjoyed Joseph Stalin from childhood to power, please like and subscribe. Unveiling the Darkness. Episode 6 is brought to you by Verum magazine and Kayleen Peoples, the editor-in-chief.